Malcolm X had once said that education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. This statement has never been truer, especially in the wake of an event such as COVID-19 that is altering the way we live life, including how we learn or acquire education. And one of the stalwarts or visionary in the space of online education is the speaker for our next session, centered around decoding education across frontiers. This gentleman, who once worked as a hedge fund analyst, had recorded over 6,500 video lessons, teaching a wide spectrum of academic subjects, originally focusing on mathematics and sciences, that has attracted more than 5.6 million subscribers on YouTube and have been viewed more than 1.7 billion times. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Mr. Salman Khan, founder and CEO of Khan Academy and Khan Lab. Welcome, sir. Over to you.
Oh, great to be here. No, I'm honored to be here, Ivan. Well, thanks for that. What I hope to do is talk a little bit just about my journey and especially how it's evolved over COVID, and then really any questions or open it up in any way because make it a conversation as much as possible. But for those who don't know Khan Academy, it was a very generous introduction. It all started as a somewhat happenstance project with family. Back in 2004, I was tutoring my young cousin, Nadia. It had just come out of, conversation that she was having trouble in math. I was actually tutoring her remotely. I was in Boston and she was in New Orleans. And slowly she got caught up with her class. She was being placed into a slower math class. And she got caught up. And then she got a little ahead of her class. At that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. And I called up her school and I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should be able to retake that placement exam. And they let her, and that same Nadia, who thought she didn't understand math at age 12, was able to go into an advanced math class. So I was a little hooked. I started tutoring her younger brothers, and simply, word got around my family that free tutoring was going on. And before I knew it, 10, 15 cousins around the country, I was tutoring every day after work for me, after school for them. And Khan Academy, it was almost, I named it that just because it was kind of this little family project. And I started writing software for them, where I was looking for ways for them to get as much practice, as much feedback as they can. I saw that the reason a lot of them were having difficulty wasn't that they weren't bright, wasn't that they didn't have good teachers. It was that as they moved through their academic careers, they were kind of ushered along at a fixed pace, and they get a 70 or 80% on a test in fifth grade. They don't fully understand decimals. Well, that grade goes into their transcript, and then they just move on to the next concept. And those gaps built up over time. And when they got to an algebra class, they had trouble. It had nothing to do with the algebra. It was because that equation required dividing decimals, and they never had a chance to learn that in the first place. So I kept going, and it was actually a friend of mine that suggested that I make when he asked, how are you scaling up your lessons? I said, it's hard to scale up my lessons. It's hard to do with 15 cousins, what I was originally doing with just a handful. And he said, well, why don't you record some of your lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube? And my original reaction was, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. But got over the idea that it wasn't my idea, and I gave it a shot. And, long story short, it soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. Started to grow. By 2009. There's several tens of thousands, 50 to 100,000 people who were using it. And that's when I frankly had trouble focusing on my day job. Set it up as a not-for-profit mission, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And it is admittedly a grandiose ambition. And one could argue it was a bit of a delusional mission when I filled out the paperwork. It was actually in this same walk-in closet that I'm at now, back to working in. But, as part of that mission, which is arguably the mission of the entire global public education system, to provide as free and as world-class of an education to anyone, anywhere. In my head at the time, and this continues to be the three pillars of Khan Academy, the way that we attempt to do that in partnership with amazing teachers in the school system around the world is providing access to world-class materials. We know there's a lot of parts of the world where you might have to go 20 miles before you can find someone who can teach calculus to you, or physics to you, or chemistry to you. Or even if you do have access to some of those courses, sometimes it might not resonate. Sometimes you're not getting access to the highest world class content. Now, the second pillar is, if you do have access to that, it should be able to be at your own time and pace. This goes back to my cousins having gaps in their knowledge, but in a traditional model, you're just moved ahead. Those gaps accumulate. There's no way for you to fill them in. And this is not just in poor schools or rural schools or places where they don't have school. Even in some of the most elite schools in the world, this is going on, where students are just moved ahead at a set pace, and they accumulate those gaps. And then when they have trouble in a trigonometry class because they had weakness in geometry or weakness in algebra or weakness in negative numbers, the students kind of start believing it's them. They're just not meant for that subject. Well, it's really their gaps. And so personalization has been a second major pillar of Khan Academy. Personalization and mastery learning, which is the opportunity incentive to identify and fill in your gaps. And then the last pillar is how can someone take this learning on a platform like Khan Academy and use it as evidence to the world that they are capable? They could get a job, they could get academic credit, they could go to a graduate school. And so you fast forward to about, let's call it 3.5 months ago, what was 100,000 users in 2009 when I first quit my job. We had crossed 100 million registered users. And, a lot of people associate us with videos, and we do have videos, but most of our resources we have as a nonprofit go into the interactive side of it, go into the software. We have functionally unlimited items for students to practice, and obviously all of the content creation. And, about half of our usage was students on their own using Khan Academy. A lot of times students do a web search, they're having trouble with photosynthesis, and then they find Khan Academy, and then, they learn to trust it, hopefully, and it gives them value, and they keep working. And then half of our usage was what we call teacher directed. These are teachers saying, yes, I've always known that when in a class of 30 kids, they all have 30 different gaps. They have 30 different levels of preparedness. I need a way to differentiate. I need a way to personalize instruction for them. And then COVID hit. And in the weeks running up to COVID, it was one of those moments where it's actually the week running up to COVID, because it all happened very fast. It's one of those moments where you kind of look left, look right, and you say, I guess this is us. We couldn't have predicted the circumstance that was evolving. But if you just thought about it for a few seconds, really, it was like, well, okay, the world is about to shut down schools next week on a big scale. Parents, teachers, students are going to need something that's accessible, arguably free. They're going to need something that is trustworthy. They're going to need something that can cover across subjects and grades, ideally personalized for them, something that can be used with teachers, something can be used with parents in the house, but also ways for teachers to be able to track and then use that as a basis for other interactions with the student. And so we immediately started a bit of a war room. We had to make sure our servers would work. We had to make sure that we were providing extra supports for parents so they knew how they could structure their calendars, their days. We started issuing learning plans. We started accelerating forward ideas of, hey, we need to create mechanisms for kids to keep learning through the school year, to keep learning through the summer, when they get back to school, to not only keep learning at their own time and pace, but really efficient ways for them to fill in all their gaps so that they will be ready for grade level. And we saw our traffic, go up depending on the week by a factor of, 250%, 300%. Registrations were 5 to 10x for parents and for students and teachers, and 20x for parents. And what's really interesting now is, as we go into this coming back to school, the writing's on the wall that this is going to be a strange back to school. You're going to have to either be socially distanced or have some type of shift-based schooling. There's going to be some subset of families who won't feel comfortable sending their kids to school, so you're going to have to do some form of virtual learning. You might have to have school shutdowns again if the virus rates pick back up. And so these principles that we've always been talking about at Khan Academy, the accessibility, first and foremost, learning should not be bound by time and space. The second principle is that students should be able to learn at their own time and pace, fill in gaps. And actually the third principle, how does someone prove what they know so they get credit? Those things have always been important, and they're going to be that much more important going forward. So we are working with schools, working with districts, working with educators around the world to help ensure that we can play our part to support them as we kind of go through this, this brave new world together. And, I'll close on, what I think might be some silver linings, because clearly this is a very suboptimal situation because school, frankly, is much more than just the learning part. Some of that, a lot of that you could do online. There's a socialization part. There's the power of having a teacher, stand next to you and mentor you and put their arm on your shoulder and say, I really believe in what you're doing. And so all of this is suboptimal, but a lot of what I've been thinking about is, the whole world has been thrown up in the air, and as it falls, how could it recrystallize? How can it resettle in a way that's maybe a better world? And one big question right now is that of accessibility, internet accessibility, and device accessibility. We exist, but we're predicated on having some form of access. There are offline versions of Khan Academy and ways to use it in low bandwidth environments. But for the most part, you're not going to get the full experience. And it's not just Khan Academy. If you want to have a synchronous session with your teacher over Zoom or some type of video conferencing, obviously, if you don't have internet access, you'll feel very isolated. You won't have access to a community like that in these times. And the silver lining is that people have been talking about the digital divide for decades, essentially ever since the internet existed, and frankly, ever since computers existed. And now we are seeing an unusual energy, an unusual positive energy of closing that digital divide around the world, and fully recognizing that the situation is very different in urban centers in the U.S. versus India, but we are seeing that energy behind it. I've always been working on this assumption, which I think is holding true, that the adoption curve for internet and broadband and the cost curves are creating a world that in 10 or 15 years, these things will be truly accessible. But that's obviously a little bit of a cop-out, because ideally they'd be accessible 10 years ago or yesterday or today. But I feel like that 10, 15 years is being pushed because of COVID, is being accelerated to a handful of years. And we're seeing certain areas where in a matter of weeks, things are being addressed there. I think another silver lining is the system as a whole is thinking about how can learning not be bound by time and space. Yes, the in-person experience is incredibly important. I'm the one that always says, if I had to pick between an amazing teacher and amazing technology for my own children or for anyone's children, I would pick the amazing teacher every time. But ideally, you can do those things together, where amazing technology is in support of the amazing teacher, so that learning is not bound by time or space, so that you can personalize, meet the needs of the student, and the teacher is liberated to do higher order things, to focus on higher order development of their students. And I think the world is thinking about what are credentials or credit. Historically, we've been focused on what's often called seat time, how long you spend in a chair listening to lectures, and then you get a grade, and that grade is on your transcript. But even if it's a C, a D, even if you didn't learn the material, it's kind of a judgment on you. You're a C student. While I think now people are realizing, look, we can't index on where students are, because we don't know where they're going to be. We need to index on what they know. And when you transition to a competency-based or mastery-based system, then if you're at an 80%, it's not to say that you're a C and you're a C student your whole life. It's just keep working on it. Get it to a 90%, get it to a 95%. It might take you a few days. It might take you a few months. It might take you a few years. That's okay. We're just not going to assume that you are who you are at that exact moment in time for the rest of your life. Big picture, I think COVID, it's going to catalyze a lot of things in a lot of domains. We could talk about remote work. We could talk about this or that, but education, I think we're really in kind of the first half of this fairly rapid evolution that we're going to see, because the last 3 months in some ways were I think the warm up for what is going to happen this coming back to school, which is promising to be quite unusual. So with that, I'd love to take any questions or comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Salman Khan, for your views and insights on virtual learning. It was extremely beneficial. I have one question for you from the audience. What is your opinion of education shaping into learning, working, tutoring, and earning?
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, what I like about that question is it is kind of talking about all of the dimensions of education. I think all too often we compartmentalize. We think of K-12 education, and then we think of higher education as a different thing, and then we think of job placement as a different thing. And I think, when we talk about COVID throwing up everything into the air, and then everything's going to settle in some way, I think this is an opportunity for us to think about, okay, what's our end goal? The end goal is that people are able to lead happy and productive lives and be members of a robust democracy that is, that serves people. And then, okay, what do people need for that? Well, they need a livelihood. They need the skills that are going to be relevant in the 21st century. They're going to need the skills to be able to engage in a public dialogue and a public discourse. Okay, then you back up from there. And, what I find interesting is you can develop a lot of those things in a combination of everything you just talked about: apprenticeships in the job, tutoring, in-person traditional instruction, and online instruction. So I think you're going to see a world where all of these things in some ways get unbundled, and then they come back together in new shapes and forms.
Thank you. I have another question for you. Online learning has always been seen as a secondary tool, or as you mentioned, a tool to complement school/formal learning. But with COVID-19, how do you see online turning into the mode for primary education? And how can teachers or visionaries such as yourself help bridge the gap between online and formal?
Yeah, well, I think, it's interesting. In the early journey of Khan Academy, my dream, and it continues to be, is that students would always be able to learn at their own time and pace and do competency-based learning. Now, there was a reality. There were some very forward-thinking schools and educators that did go all into these kind of ideas. And these ideas are older than Khan Academy. It's just tools like Khan Academy allow them to be practical in a classroom with 30 kids. But what we saw is that, and we've seen, is that for a large swath of the education system pre-COVID, it was very hard to, just from a mind shift, to say, okay, we're going to let every student learn at their own time and pace. The classroom is not about lecture anymore. It's about the teacher being informed by data and be kind of a conductor of an orchestra and understanding, okay, those kids could use this intervention. I could group those kids together. We can do this dialogue on this or that. And so because of that, over the years, we've said, look, if you're able to use these types of tools for even 45 minutes a week, we have efficacy studies. This accelerates their learning. So, the term, we call it a supplement, as the questioner referred to. Now, COVID, by definition, your traditional curriculum really does not work in this COVID world, because traditional curricula are very much bound to, you have 55 minutes a day for 5 days a week in a physical environment. Even the schools that are doing it very well right now, they recognize you can't do 55 minutes a day for 6 subjects 5 days a week over Zoom. It's not going to be, the teachers are going to burn out, the students are going to burn out. It's not going to be a good experience. And so they're saying, okay, we're going to do 2 or 3, maybe kind of synchronous sessions over video conferencing. And these are the schools that are well resourced and they can assume some level of internet access at home. And then they're saying, but we have to put, a lot of it's going to be asynchronous learning where kids are learning at their own time and pace. And so that the percentage of how much is personalized and how much is kind of not place-based probably has gone from 20-25% in a lot of classrooms to 50-60%, maybe 70% in a lot of classrooms. And that's likely to continue through this coming school year because of all of the dynamics that we talked about. And so, and it has to be mainstream. It's not just pretty much every school system in the world is thinking about these things. And so I think that's the type, you have a year of that. I think it'll be very hard to go fully back to what was going on before.
I think that was a fantastic answer. Thanks for your insights. I have one final question for you. On your point of indexing students and taking it in the context of a populous country like India, what plan of action would you propose in order to maintain a structure?
Yeah, I think structure matters a lot. One of the things, that was why one of the first things we did when the school closures were happening is put out what for students of different ages, what could their day look like? You should still wake up in the morning and brush your teeth and change out of your pajamas and then have breakfast with your family and do some learning, then take a break, do some learning, then go outside, do some learning. So I think structure is essential, especially in times when folks are socially distanced, or kind of the traditional public square is strange in a lot of ways. I think structure, and a related to structure, is habit. I think if students fall out of that, they can slowly or very quickly atrophy a lot of their skills. And I'll say, there's another meta, and maybe this is a good point to end on. A lot of times when we talk about education, we can, and I'm guilty of this as well, we very much, okay, how do we make sure kids' test scores improve? How do we make sure they learn how to factor a polynomial better? How do we make sure they have reading comprehension? And those are all very important things, to be very clear. And that's where the Khan Academy focuses a lot of its energy on. But there's a meta thing that's happening here, which is this is forcing students to have more agency over their own learning. It's forcing students to, I know straight A students who, if someone doesn't tell them what to do, they're kind of like, well, I'm not going to do anything. Or, teacher, tell me what to do next. And, we're big believers that the most important skill for the 21st century, frankly, forever, I mean, I think this was important in the 19th century too, but for the 21st century especially, is the ability for you to drive your own learning, the ability to have agency over your life. Because both you and I, in the next 3 years, there's going to be something that we're going to have to learn, and there's not going to be a system telling us what to do. And students who are growing up today are going to see that 10x of what you and I have seen. So if there's another silver lining, it's that this might be a push for more agency on the part of students, which will help them learn things better as well.
Wonderful. On that note, I'd like to say a big thank you, Mr. Salman Khan, for your keynote address titled, Will Virtual Learning Go Mainstream Post-COVID-19? Thank you for taking our questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ahmed.